March 16, 1521, a fleet of battered ships appeared on the Philippine horizon. Survivors of a voyage meant to circle the earth. At their helm, Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese navigator sailing under the Spanish flag. He wasn't just lost. He was about to alter the course of a region that had flourished for centuries with its own rulers, traders, and gods. This is not just the story of one man arriving on foreign shores. It's the story of first contact, a collision between two worlds. A tropical archipelago thriving with culture, trade, and belief would now face its most profound test. As Magellan stepped onto Philippine soil, he likely didn't realize what would follow: bloodshed, alliances, conversions, and the seeds of colonization. Who welcomed him? Who resisted? And how did one moment trigger 5 centuries of transformation? This is the story of the arrival of Magellan and how a single step in 1521 would echo across generations. Let's trace his journey, island by island, choice by choice, and discover how one explorer's dream set the Philippines on a new path forever. To understand why Magellan reached the Philippines, we must start with his true goal, the Spice Islands. At the time, spices like cloves, nutmeg, and cinnamon were worth more than gold in Europe. Controlling their trade meant wealth, power, and empire. Magellan believed he could reach them by sailing west, not east, like the Portuguese. He convinced King Charles I of Spain to fund a daring westward expedition. In 1519, he set sail with 5 ships and over 270 men. The voyage was brutal. Mutiny, starvation, scurvy, and violent storms decimated the fleet. Magellan crossed the Atlantic, then navigated through the strait at the tip of South America that now bears his name, the Strait of Magellan. He entered the Pacific Ocean, a name he coined for its deceptive calm, and sailed blindly into its vastness. For months, they saw no land. Starving, dying, desperate, Magellan and his crew finally spotted islands on the horizon. These were the Mariana Islands, and shortly after, they would reach what would later be called the Philippines. But for now, they were explorers, not conquerors yet. On March 16, 1521, Magellan's fleet landed on Homonhon Island, off the coast of present-day eastern Samar. The men were weak, nearly starving, barely alive. The locals watched from a distance, unsure of who these strange bearded men were. Fortunately for the explorers, the island was uninhabited, so they could rest without immediate conflict. Soon, nearby islanders arrived, curious, cautious, but open to communication. Through gestures and gifts, they exchanged food, water, and coconuts. It was a moment of tentative peace, strangers meeting not as enemies but as humans. This was the first recorded contact between Filipinos and Europeans. Magellan knew he had found something special. He saw an opportunity, not just to restock supplies, but to explore these islands further. The people, the culture, the resources all fascinated him. It was more than a pit stop. It was the beginning of something bigger. From this moment on, Magellan would no longer simply be passing through. He would engage with chiefs, claim territory, and eventually find both friendship and fatal resistance. After Homonhon, Magellan moved toward Siloan and Limasawa, small islands nearby. Here, they encountered more organized local communities. Trade blossomed quickly. Magellan's crew exchanged beads, cloth, and trinkets for local food, fish, and hospitality. But it was more than economics. These early interactions were political and symbolic. Raja Kalambu, the local chief of Limasawa, welcomed Magellan. They dined together, held ceremonies, and even sealed friendship through blood compacts. This gesture, the Sanjuguan, symbolized deep mutual trust. But Magellan wasn't just grateful. He saw opportunity. These rulers might help him expand Spain's reach and convert souls to Christianity. On March 31st, 1521, the Spaniards and locals held what many consider the first Catholic Mass on Philippine soil, celebrated by Fr. Pedro de Valderrama. It was a moment of unity, or so it seemed. In truth, it marked the beginning of a cultural shift. To Magellan, it was divine purpose. To the locals, perhaps a gesture of diplomacy. But to history, it was the first thread in a long fabric of conquest, faith, and resistance. In early April, Magellan arrived in Cebu, a bustling trade center led by Raja Humabon, a powerful local ruler. Unlike the smaller islands, Cebu had influence, population, and regional clout. Magellan saw a chance to make a grand impression. He offered gifts, medicines, and assurances of friendship. Raja Humabon, intrigued and strategic, welcomed Magellan, hoping to strengthen his own power through alliance with these foreign arrivals. They sealed a blood compact, exchanged honors, and days later Magellan baptized Humabon, his queen Hara Amahan, and hundreds of locals into Christianity. The baptisms on April 14, 1521, marked a turning point. Magellan was no longer just an explorer. He was now a missionary, a political actor, and a would-be conqueror. He renamed Hara Amahan Queen Juana and gave her a statue of the Santo Niño, the child Jesus, which remains a major religious symbol in Cebu to this day. But while Magellan gained allies in Cebu, he also gained enemies. News of his presence spread, and not everyone was eager to bow to a foreign god or crown. Flush with his success in Cebu, Magellan made a fateful decision. Raja Humabon told him of a nearby island chief who refused to recognize his authority, Lapu-Lapu of Mactan. Proud and defiant, Lapu-Lapu rejected conversion, submission, and foreign presence. Magellan, perhaps overconfident, believed a show of force would bring him to heel. On April 27, 1521, he set sail with a small force of Spanish soldiers and native allies to confront Lapu-Lapu. But Magellan underestimated the resistance and overestimated his influence. He had no full understanding of Mactan's terrain, times, or warriors. He thought his armor and muskets would ensure victory. But the battle that awaited him would become legendary. It was no longer a peaceful expedition. It was a confrontation between a colonizer and a defender of his land. What happened next would transform Lapu-Lapu into a national hero and Magellan into a martyr of imperial ambition. The journey that had circled the world would end here on the shores of a small island in the central Visayas. As dawn broke on April 27, 1521, Magellan and his men waded toward Mactan's shore. But the water was shallow, the rocks jagged, and their armor heavy. Lapu-Lapu's warriors, fierce, agile, and numerous, waited. Armed with spears, capellan swords, and bows, they launched a coordinated attack. Magellan's muskets were slow and ineffective in close combat. As the battle intensified, Magellan found himself isolated. Struck in the leg by a poisoned arrow, then in the arm, he fought bravely but was overwhelmed. According to chronicler Antonio Pigafetta, Magellan begged his men to flee as he stood his ground. Finally, he was struck in the face and killed. His body was never recovered. The explorer who had sailed across the world died not in triumph, but in defeat at the hands of a native chieftain defending his land. The Battle of Mactan was a victory for Lapu-Lapu and a powerful symbol of resistance. It shattered the illusion that European technology guaranteed domination, and it warned future colonizers the islands would not be easily conquered. Magellan's death shocked both the Spaniards and their native allies. The once confident expedition was now leaderless and exposed. Without Magellan's leadership, tensions grew between the Europeans and Raja Humabon. Days later, the fragile alliance crumbled. At a banquet supposedly held in peace, Humabon's men turned on the Spaniards. Several were killed in a surprise attack, either in revenge for Magellan's actions or to remove the weakened foreign presence altogether. Only a few Spaniards survived. The fleet, now reduced and scattered, fled Cebu in chaos. What began as a diplomatic mission had spiraled into betrayal, bloodshed, and retreat. Eventually, only one ship, the Victoria, completed the circumnavigation of the globe, returning to Spain in 1522. But the damage was done. Magellan's journey had opened the door to the Philippines, and it would never fully close. Though the Spaniards left, they would return decades later, this time to stay. The memory of Magellan's arrival lingered like a shadow over the islands, foreshadowing centuries of conquest, faith, and colonial transformation. Though not well known globally, Lapu-Lapu remains a towering figure in Philippine history. As the first Filipino to resist foreign domination, he is celebrated as a national hero, a symbol of courage, independence, and sovereignty. His refusal to submit to Magellan has been retold for generations, especially during the colonial period and the rise of Filipino nationalism. Monuments, currency, and even military honors bear his name. In Mactan, a towering statue of Lapu-Lapu faces the sea, as if forever guarding the land against invaders. In recent decades, he's been embraced not just as a historical figure, but as a spiritual and cultural icon. The story of the Battle of Mactan reminds Filipinos that resistance was always part of their story, that colonialism was not simply imposed, but contested. Lapu-Lapu's victory was short-lived, but its symbolism remains powerful. He wasn't fighting to be remembered, he was fighting for his people. And in doing so, he carved his name into the very foundation of Filipino identity. The arrival of Magellan is often presented as the beginning of Philippine history, but that's a myth. History here did not begin in 1521. The islands had centuries of culture, governance, religion, and trade before Magellan stepped ashore. What his arrival represents is first contact, the moment two worlds collided. It wasn't just about Christianity, conquest, or exploration. It was about misunderstanding, opportunity, diplomacy, and defiance. For the Spanish, it was the start of empire in the East. For the natives, it was the first sign that the world was changing. The story of Magellan's arrival is a story of hope and hubris, friendship and betrayal, faith and violence. It set the tone for centuries of colonial rule and centuries of resistance. By looking closely at what happened island by island, leader by leader, we understand not just the story of an explorer, but the resilience of a people who met foreign sails with both open hands and clenched fists. The Philippines was never passive, and it all began with the arrival of Magellan. Before Magellan's arrival, the Philippine archipelago was far from isolated. The islands were part of vibrant maritime trade networks, stretching from China and India to Arabia and the Malay world. Powerful barangay states, ruled by datus, Rajas and Lakan managed alliances, trade, and warfare. Cultures flourished with indigenous belief systems, elaborate rituals, and languages rooted in Austronesian traditions. In ports like Cebu and Butuan, Chinese porcelain, Indian beads, and Arab glassware flowed in exchange for gold, pearls, and forest goods. Islam had already taken root in parts of Mindanao and the Sulu archipelago. The Philippines was a cultural crossroads long before European sails appeared. Magellan, therefore, stepped into a world not primitive, but sophisticated, interconnected, and politically nuanced. His arrival didn't bring civilization, it disrupted a thriving one. To see 1521 as the beginning of history erases what came before, centuries of local innovation, leadership, and exchange. The real story is how Filipinos responded to Magellan and how their choices would shape the coming storm of empire. It wasn't a blank slate. It was a living mosaic, and Magellan's step would forever alter its design. Much of what we know about Magellan's journey and his arrival in the Philippines comes from Antonio Pigafetta, an Italian nobleman and chronicler who sailed with the expedition. His journal is the most detailed first-hand account of the voyage, offering descriptions of people, customs, rituals, and geography. Pigafetta wasn't just a recorder. He was fascinated by the world he encountered. He documented native words, observed social hierarchies, and even tried to understand local cosmologies. His writing is a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and Eurocentric assumption. He praised the hospitality of chiefs, marveled at tattooed warriors, and noted the elaborate rituals of diplomacy. But his narrative was also colored by his mission to justify the expedition and Christian conversion. While invaluable, his account must be read critically. What was misunderstood, exaggerated, or omitted? Still, without Pigafetta, the memory of 1521 might be reduced to legend. His journal ensures we see the encounter not just as a battle or a landing, but a complex human moment. Through his eyes, we witness first contact, filtered through ink, perception, and ambition. One of Magellan's most strategic tools was not the sword, but the cross. Conversion to Christianity wasn't just a spiritual act, it was a political one. When Raja Humayban was baptized, he wasn't only adopting a new faith, he was aligning himself with Spain. The mass baptisms Magellan led were calculated, part of a wider vision of empire. Christianity offered a new structure of loyalty, with Spain and God as dual authorities. To the Spaniards, it was a divine mission. To local leaders, it was a new form of alliance or submission. The display of religious rituals, processions, blessings, images of saints, impressed some locals but confused others. When Queen Juana received the Santo Niño, it symbolized more than faith. It was the beginning of a shift in spiritual power. Yet, many communities resisted or only adopted Christianity on the surface. Syncretism emerged, blending Christian and indigenous beliefs. Religion became both a bridge and a battleground. The seeds Magellan planted would grow into cathedrals and revolutions, all rooted in that first Mass on Limasawa and the promise of salvation or control. When Magellan arrived, Cebu was already a flourishing port and political center. Positioned strategically in the Visayas, it served as a hub for trade with neighboring islands and foreign merchants, including Chinese, Malays, and other Southeast Asians. Raja Humayban ruled with authority, backed by both lineage and diplomacy. His court included advisors, warriors, and traders. Markets bustled with activity. The people of Cebu practiced animist beliefs, revered nature spirits, and held elaborate rituals involving priests called babaylan. Women held influential roles in spirituality and commerce. It was not a passive society waiting to be civilized, but an active player in regional affairs. Homonhon likely viewed Magellan not as a savior, but as another foreign envoy, a potentially useful one. The alliance he struck was pragmatic. If these strangers brought guns, ships, and goods, why not make them allies? But this decision also invited conflict with rival chieftains, with traditional spiritual leaders, and eventually with his own people. Cebu's story before colonization is often forgotten, yet it was a vital seat of culture, trade, and sovereignty. Shaken by Magellan's arrival, but far from erased. Long before Magellan's fleet reached the archipelago, the Philippines was governed through a system of barangays, kinship-based communities led by chieftains known as datus. These leaders wielded authority based on wealth, bravery, and ancestry. Their power was decentralized but respected, forming a patchwork of alliances and rivalries across islands. The datus collected tribute, enforced law, led warfare, and settled disputes. Loyalty was personal, bound not to a distant state, but to the datu and his community. When Magellan engaged with Raja Homonhon, or Lapu-Lapu, he was navigating this complex network. There was no unified Philippines at the time, only interconnected societies. The Spanish failed to understand this, and they assumed one ruler could command many, unaware of how autonomy and pride defined island life. This misreading would lead to underestimating leaders like Lapu-Lapu. The arrival of Magellan challenged the authority of traditional leaders and introduced a foreign model of centralized monarchy and empire. Over time, the barangay system would be reshaped, but in 1521, it was still strong, resilient, and deeply tied to local identity. One of the most enduring symbols from Magellan's arrival is the Santo Niño de Cebu, a small statue of the Christ child gifted to Queen Juana. Crafted in Europe, it became a powerful icon of faith, later believed to have survived fires and destruction. Today, it is the centerpiece of Sinulog, one of the largest religious festivals in the Philippines. But in 1521, the Santo Niño carried deeper meaning. To the Spaniards, it was a symbol of successful conversion, evidence that Christianity had taken root. To Queen Juana, it may have been a beautiful and mysterious gift, but for the people, it was a turning point. Over centuries, the Santo Niño would be woven into folk beliefs, venerated in processions, and embraced by communities with unique local interpretations. It stands today as a living fusion of colonizer and colonized, of imposed faith and adapted spirituality. What began as a tool of conquest became a cherished national symbol. The Santo Niño reminds us that history is not just what is taken, but what is transformed by faith, by time, and by the people who claim it. History loves a good what if. So let's ask, what if Magellan had survived the Battle of Mactan? Would the Philippines have been conquered earlier? Would Lapu-Lapu have been executed or converted? Perhaps Magellan, emboldened by victory, would have returned to Spain as a hero, leading a second, more forceful expedition. Or perhaps he would have remained in Cebu, establishing a colony ahead of the Spanish crown's official annexation. But Magellan's death changed everything. It delayed Spain's efforts to colonize the archipelago by nearly 4 decades. The remaining crew abandoned their plans, focused on returning to Europe. His death also set a tone. Filipino resistance was real, and it had teeth. Lapu-Lapu's victory didn't stop colonization, but it reminded the Spanish that domination would come at a cost. In the end, Magellan's voyage succeeded in proving the Earth could be circumnavigated, but his personal ambition to claim new lands for Spain and God died with him on the sands of Mactan. His death became a historical pivot point. A single battle changed the pace of empire. After Magellan's death, it would take Spain 44 years to return and establish a permanent presence in the Philippines. Between 1521 and 1565, the islands continued as they were, trading, warring, and evolving without European control. Local rulers remained in power, and Christianity did not spread significantly. This period is often overlooked, but is critical. It shows that Magellan's arrival did not immediately colonize the Philippines. It was only in 1565, with the arrival of Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, that Spain established a lasting colony, beginning in Cebu. That's when conquest, missionary work, and administrative control accelerated. The memory of Magellan lingered, though. It served as both warning and inspiration. Some chiefs remembered the alliance with Homonhon, others recalled the betrayal and bloodshed. The Santo Niño, preserved by locals, became a miraculous relic when the Spaniards returned. Those gap years between arrival and empire remind us that colonization is not instant. It's a slow, negotiated, often violent process. And in those 4 decades, Filipinos continued to live, resist, and adapt, with the shadow of Magellan never too far behind. Over the centuries, Ferdinand Magellan became both a hero and a villain, depending on who tells the story. In Spain and Portugal, he was hailed as a brave explorer who dared to cross unknown oceans. In global maritime history, he's credited with completing the first circumnavigation of the globe, even though he didn't survive it. But in the Philippines, Magellan's legacy is more complicated. He is remembered less for his courage and more for his disruption, the man who brought the cross and the sword. For many, he represents the beginning of colonization, despite being defeated. Yet modern views are more nuanced. Some Filipinos see him as part of a shared historical encounter, one that set the stage for the rich, hybrid culture that followed. Monuments to both Magellan and Lapu-Lapu stand in Cebu and Mactan, facing each other across time and interpretation. Magellan's name lives on in straits, maps, textbooks, and debates. He may have fallen on Mactan, but in memory he continues to march through history's pages, both as conqueror and catalyst. Where Magellan's legacy is debated, Lapu-Lapu's is crystal clear in the Filipino heart. Hero, defender, warrior, king. His defiance at Mactan became a symbol of native resistance, long before Jose Rizal, Andres Bonifacio, or the Katipunan. Lapu-Lapu is celebrated in songs, coins, statues, and the renaming of cities. The Philippine National Police even bestows the Medal of Lapu-Lapu for acts of bravery. His legacy cuts through colonial narratives, reminding the nation that resistance didn't begin in the 1800s. It began the moment a foreign power landed and demanded submission. In 2021, during the 500th anniversary of the Battle of Mactan, the country honored not Magellan's voyage, but Lapu-Lapu's victory. It was a bold statement. Our history is not just about who arrived, but who stood their ground. Lapu-Lapu lives on as a symbol of strength, independence, and Filipino pride. His legacy echoes in the archipelago's fierce love for freedom and the belief that even the most powerful empires can be stopped by the courage of one island and one leader. The Philippine archipelago, more than 7,000 islands scattered across the Pacific, played a crucial role in how Magellan's arrival unfolded. These islands weren't just random landmasses. They were home to diverse ethnic groups, dialects, and belief systems. Geography made conquest difficult. Unlike continental empires, the islands had no central authority to overthrow. Magellan's journey from Homonhon to Cebu to Mactan required navigating not just seas, but local power dynamics. The distance between islands also meant that news spread unevenly, and so did resistance. Mactan's refusal didn't trigger widespread revolt, but it did expose Spain's vulnerability. Later colonizers would understand the need for divide-and-conquer tactics, leveraging rivalries between datas. The very nature of the islands made long-term occupation challenging, and it was only through alliances, manipulation, and superior weapons that Spain eventually gained control. But in 1521, geography gave Filipinos an edge. Magellan may have arrived with maps, but the sea belonged to those who had sailed it for generations, and it would be the tides, terrain, and tribal loyalties that defined his final days. Historical accounts often overlook the role of women during Magellan's arrival, yet they were present, both as participants and symbols. Queen Juana, wife of Raja Humayban, was not just a passive figure. Her conversion to Christianity and reception of the Santo Niño carried immense weight. As a female leader, her choices influenced others in Cebu's court. In native society, women held key roles, from spiritual leaders, babaylan, to trade negotiators and midwives. Magellan's crew, however, came from a patriarchal society. They may not have understood the matrilineal structures present in some island cultures. The clash of gender norms added another layer to the encounter. When women converted or allied with the Spaniards, it often helped cement relationships, but it also signaled shifts in traditional power. The long-term impact of colonization would drastically affect gender roles, often diminishing women's traditional authority. Yet in that first contact, women were observers, mediators, and quiet revolutionaries. Their presence reminds us that history isn't just made by warriors and kings, but also by queens, mothers, healers, and the voices often left unwritten. When Magellan's crew met local islanders, they didn't just encounter a new people, they encountered an entire worldview. Yet miscommunication was inevitable. Gestures of respect were sometimes seen as submission. Local deities were dismissed as idols. Rituals were misread as superstition. Even blood compacts, sacred acts of alliance for Filipinos, were seen by Europeans as quaint customs. Pigafetta's writings reflect fascination, but also condescension. The Spanish believed they were bringing civilization, unaware they were entering one. These early cultural misunderstandings shaped the trajectory of colonization. What began as diplomacy could quickly turn into coercion. What was meant as hospitality might be mistaken for conversion. Language barriers, differing worldviews, and religious superiority turned potential friendships into eventual conflict. Still, these moments of first contact were complex. Some Filipinos saw value in alliance, others saw danger. The result was not a clear good versus evil, but a collision of truths. The arrival of Magellan reminds us that when cultures meet, It is not always violence or peace, but a fragile dance of interpretation, often with high stakes. Magellan's arrival in the Philippines didn't happen in a vacuum. The early 1500s were a time of global expansion, competition, and empire building. Spain and Portugal were racing to chart the world, each seeking trade, territory, and souls to convert. In the Americas, the Aztec Empire was falling to Hernan courts. In the east, the Ming dynasty ruled China, and Islamic sultanates controlled much of Southeast Asia. The Philippines, though independent, sat at the crossroads of these currents. The islands were a prize not just for resources, but for strategic access to Asia. Magellan's arrival was part of this larger story, the transformation of the world through exploration, trade, conquest, and colonialism. The decisions made in places like Cebu or Mactan rippled outward, affecting maps, monarchies, and maritime law. By anchoring in Homonhon, Magellan didn't just enter a new territory. He placed the Philippines into the global imperial narrative. From that moment on, the archipelago was no longer isolated. It became a contested space in the age of empire, one that would be shaped by centuries of global and local forces. Magellan's crew may have left the Philippines in retreat, but Christianity remained. Over time, missionaries returned, Augustinians, Franciscans, Jesuits, spreading the gospel and building churches. Today, the Philippines is one of the largest Catholic nations on earth, with over 80% of its population identifying as Christian. This legacy began in 1521 with the baptism of Raja Hiumaban and Queen Juana. But the spiritual journey of Filipinos was far from linear. Indigenous beliefs were never fully erased. They were blended, adapted, and reimagined. Festivals like Sinulog and Ati-Atihan fuse Christian devotion with pre-colonial celebration. The result is a hybrid spirituality, uniquely Filipino. For some, this legacy is beautiful, a testament to resilience and cultural fusion. For others, it's a reminder of lost traditions and imposed faith. But regardless of perspective, the spiritual transformation that began with Magellan's arrival endures. It echoes in prayers, dances, churches, and family altars. The cross planted in 1521 grew roots, tangled, deep, and complex, forming part of the soul of the Filipino nation. How do Filipinos remember Magellan today? In textbooks, he's often a footnote. In classrooms, his name appears alongside dates, battles, and conversions. But deeper stories of resistance, complexity, and indigenous agency are often overlooked. For generations, education systems emphasized the civilizing narrative of colonization. But modern historians, educators, and artists are reclaiming the story. Documentaries, literature, and even theater now portray Magellan not as a hero, but as part of a broader saga of cultural collision. Public memory is shifting. The 2021 quincentennial commemorations, for instance, celebrated Filipino identity, not foreign arrival. Education is no longer just about facts and timelines. It's about perspective. Who tells the story? Whose voice is heard? And what values are passed down? The story of Magellan is now an invitation to question, to investigate, and to reclaim. Because history is not just what happened, it's what we choose to remember and what we choose to honor. In the classroom and beyond, 1521 is no longer just about who came, but about who was already here. From murals to plays to online videos, artists and storytellers have reimagined the arrival of Magellan for modern audiences. Films portray Lapu-Lapu as a fearless warrior. Novels dive into the minds of Cebuanos torn between loyalty and resistance. Street art in Cebu boldly paints indigenous heroes with pride and defiance. These creative expressions are not just entertainment, they're acts of historical reclamation. They question colonial narratives and elevate Filipino perspectives. Even hip-hop and spoken word poetry have taken up the story, blending ancient rhythms with modern fire. In doing so, they keep the events of 1521 alive and relevant. Storytelling becomes a way of healing, of asserting identity, of honoring ancestors. In a world flooded with content, retelling the story of Magellan's arrival from a Filipino point of view becomes an act of resistance. It's about controlling the narrative. It's about saying, we were not discovered. We were encountered. And we remember, art is where history breathes, and the arrival of Magellan continues to inspire generations of creators, activists, and truth seekers. Did Magellan discover the Philippines? To many, the answer is a firm no. The islands were already inhabited, thriving, and connected to global trade routes. The idea of discovery ignores the rich cultures that existed before 1521. This narrative, rooted in colonial ideology, has been challenged by Filipino historians, scholars, and students. Today, many prefer to call 1521 the first encounter, a more accurate, respectful term. Discovery implies ownership. Encounter recognizes mutual presence. Reframing the language changes everything. It shifts the focus from European achievement to shared history, full of tension, learning, and conflict. It honors the people who were already here, their stories, struggles, and sovereignty. The rejection of the discovery myth is more than semantics. It's a declaration. Filipinos have always had history, even before they were named Filipinos. Magellan's arrival was significant, but it didn't create a nation. That nation was built by those who remembered and resisted long after the sails faded from view. What can the modern world learn from Magellan's arrival? That exploration without understanding breeds conflict. That power, when unchecked, often ends in tragedy. That resistance, no matter how small, can echo for centuries. The events of 1521 remind us that history is not written by victors alone. It's shaped by those who endure, who adapt, who tell their side. Today, the Philippines continues to wrestle with its colonial past through language, faith, politics, and identity. But the memory of Mactan stands tall. It says, we were never silent. We were never submissive. Magellan brought the world to the islands, but the islands brought something back: courage, complexity, and the voice of a people who refused to be forgotten. In every classroom, in every festival, in every retelling, the story lives on. And so do its lessons. To explore is noble, but to listen, to respect, is greater. That's the message carved into the shoreline where one man fell and one nation stood. Magellan's arrival was just a step, but it was a step that changed the world. For him, it was the final chapter in a daring voyage. For the Philippines, it was the first page in a long, contested history, one filled with courage, compromise, and cultural transformation. From Homonhon to Mactan, from cross to sword, from mass to massacre, minus 1,521 was more than a year. It was a turning point. Today, 5 centuries later, that step still echoes. It echoes in prayers and protests, in school books, and in songs. It echoes in statues of Lapu-Lapu and in festivals for the Santo Niño. It reminds us that history is never simple. It's layered, human, and alive. Magellan may have sailed for gold and glory, but what he found was something greater, a people who would not be conquered easily, and who, even when colonized, never lost their spirit. The story of Magellan's arrival is the story of first contact, but more importantly, it's the story of how the Filipino identity began to rise even before the first flag was raised.